Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're so glad you've joined us for another episode of Godless Moms podcast. My name is Janice Selby, and I'm a registered professional counselor in British Columbia, Canada. And I'm joined by my lovely co-host, the original Godless Mom, Courtney Hurd. Hi, Courtney. We just want to mention a couple things before we get started in our show. First of all, I'm sure you already know in the comments section that we have going that you're free to type in. We do ask that you don't do any proselytizing, please. We're not interested in trying to convert anybody here, obviously. So please be respectful and keep those views to yourself. Oh, and I also wanted to remind you, in the description below our show here, you will find links for the audio-only versions of the podcast, and also a link for IAA membership. Courtney can tell you more about that, and a link for the conference on religious trauma, which is coming up in May, and I'm going to be hosting that online. And if you're someone who has suffered from religious trauma syndrome, or you're a therapist and you're interested in learning more about it, I hope you'll join us. Conference on Religious Trauma, and it's abbreviated CORT, CORT. And you're the other Court. How are you doing, Courtney?
I'm good. I'm tired. I had a very short sleep because we sleep with the window open, and there was a whole bunch of coyotes outside last night, and that of course makes my dog start howling, if you can call it that.
Wow.
So
It's interesting. Like, it's kind of cool, but yeah.
Somebody in the chat said, in the Facebook chat said that they are an RTS survivor. So welcome. And we're really excited to have to be able to tell you guys that court is back on, because last year that was canceled because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it really sucked. It was really hard to to try and deal with all the fallout from having to cancel or postpone a conference I'd worked so hard on, and it was going to be in person in Vancouver, but we've found a workaround this time, and we're holding it online instead. And we'll see about next year. Maybe we'll get to meet in person next year. That'd be very cool.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I'd look forward to that. So this week we are talking about raising girls, because on, I forget what day of the week it was. All the days just run together for me during this whole pandemic thing. But this past week it was International Women's Day, and we thought we would talk about raising girls, because it's definitely a little bit different from raising boys. At least in my experience, it was. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I haven't had the opportunity to raise boys. I only raised two daughters, and I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian home, an evangelical Christian home. And then after I married, I became even more fundamentalist. And so the way I started raising my daughters was very different from the way that I finished raising my daughters, because when my children were little, there was no internet, but I mean, we didn't even have TV in our home, and the radio was only on Christian stations, and I wore a head covering and no makeup, just long skirts and dresses. Modesty, purity culture, very important in our home, and I homeschooled our daughters as well for a time. Mm-hmm. So I worked really hard to try and instill my religious values in them. And I thought the patriarchy was just great. I thought it was just great because the Bible talks about patriarchs being Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and really pushes the idea that men are the protectors of women in marriage. But of course, it's also the men that wield all the power in marriage, in religious marriages. So even after I came out of religion and have been, going through my own process of deconversion or deconstruction over these last 10 years, still sometimes I forget, like I'll something will happen and it'll just bring up a memory, or I'll do something wrote without thinking of it, and it's come out of my religious background, and it's taken my daughters um, kind of letting me know gently and sometimes not so gently, Mom, that's old. That's like from your religious way of thinking. That's not how it
Mm-hmm.
is in the real world. And they were the ones that really gave me a good tune up as far as what patriarchy really means.
Mm-hmm. What because I like obviously we've covered this a million times that I was raised without religion, so I never got the purity culture thing or anything like that. There was no pushing modesty in my house. My parents always empowered me to wear whatever I want and to go after whatever I wanted and trusted my own decisions for me, sometimes to a fault. Um, but what is purity culture? Like, explain it to me because it's super foreign to me.
um, really, I call it just another form of hymen worship. So the idea being that um, a female's best attribute, really the best that she has to give, is her virginity. And so her virginity, her virtue must be protected at all costs. And I mean, it's not a new idea. Think of chastity belts in the Middle Ages, and contraptions that
Yeah.
they put women into. Um, but it's so, and purity culture also affects males for sure. So what essentially it teaches that females have to be responsible constantly for how males might react. So they're not to wear anything revealing at all or
Mm-hmm.
immodest, because it might cause a brother to stumble, or it might cause any boys or men in their vicinity to have impure thoughts. But
Mm-hmm.
so the flip side of that is it's also teaching males that they don't have any control. They can't control their sexual urges and impulses. Basically, that they're just these monsters, waiting, lurking, waiting for an opportunity. Um, and so that's harmful to both parties. And then along with that, there's uh, certainly for boys especially, I know it's really pushed the idea that masturbation is a sin, and masturbation is somehow wrong, and you are wrong, your body is wrong for having sexual desires and impulses. And then this can create a real disconnect for people who've grown up in purity culture, a disconnect between their body and their emotions and the rest of their life. And it can really be a massive hurdle for some folks
Mm-hmm.
to overcome. So that's purity culture in a nutshell.
It's like that stuff just makes me really mad. It sounds like just pure, straight up abuse. Like there's no question about it. It's I can't imagine shaming a child for having sexual desires or for masturbating. I can't imagine that. Like that you picture yourself at that of your life and how awkward it already was. How terrible it was to be going through all of these changes, and it was just so strange and so weird. And then to add on top of that you've got somebody basically shaming you for
Mm-hmm.
your normal way of going through it, and I just can't imagine that. That's crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Lee Smith in the chat said the purity culture is so toxic and damaging. It made me feel like a dirty piece of worthless shit for so long. It really screwed up my view of sexuality when I was young, and I can imagine that would absolutely change your sexual like how you look at sexuality for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And your own acceptance of yourself, of course. And when we deem anything to be off limits, guess what we become really curious about and want to find out about. And when we look at North American culture, particularly in the United States, there seems to be almost such an immaturity around sexuality. It's like a hypersexualized culture. Um, and that's largely because of how religion has really suppressed and forbidden anybody from having any pleasure around sex at all. It's interesting and it's sad. But this one reason we do this show is we want to be encouraging you as parents to be talking with your kids about sex very
Mhm.
openly and honestly, and letting them know there is not one single thing wrong with them or with their body or with their sex drive. And they can talk to you about it and they can talk to their doctor about it. And you're there to support them as they learn and grow.
It was funny because when you said that, like in North America, there is definitely a different approach to sexuality. We're basically prudes over here. Like we're just, I've never really understood it, and part of that is because of the parents that I grew up with. They were always very open, and nothing was off limits to talk about. And but I remember when I was 8, we went to go live in Australia for a year, and Australia is different when it comes
Oh,
to nudity and stuff like that. When I remember going to my first beach in Australia, and there were topless women sunbathing. They call it sunbathing. We call it tanning here.
mhm.
And I remember my brother, he was really little at the time, and he was so fascinated because you never see anything like that. We were just getting a kick out of how fascinated my brother was with that, but it was very different. But I was 8 at the time, and it took maybe an hour to get used to it, and I did not suffer any side effects because I saw strangers' boobs on the beach. And it's definitely different for my brother ended up marrying a Danish woman, and it's different in their culture too. Like over in Europe and stuff like that, they approach those sorts of things a lot more of a relaxed approach.
Mhm.
Um and I wish that we could be like that here. I don't understand all of the shame that is surrounding sex, especially when it comes to girls. And that's one of the reasons why when I um ended up having my stepdaughter come and live with us, that the first thing I did was talk to her about sex and talk to her about getting on birth control, and
Mhm.
I kept reiterating, and I still reiterate, no judgment ever. No judgment. Your body is your body. I trust you to make the right decisions for you. And even if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're in trouble, or you feel you're in danger of some kind, there's still not going to be any judgment. I'm just here to help. I'm here to be your support system, and that's it. And
Mhm.
I think that's the way that girls should be raised, obviously, because that's why I'm doing
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, the idea of anyone being able to control anyone else, to control their sexuality, to control their expression of sexuality or their desires or the clothes that they wear or the things that they say. Um, yeah, that's problematic. Absolutely. And, thinking of in Canada, so talking about the idea of the patriarchy and women, there just being such a mismatch in the power dynamic there. It's crazy. And so we're in 2021, women still aren't receiving equal pay for equal work. And I looked up about voting in Canada. Um, Caucasian women in 1921 were given the right to vote. Other women were given the right to vote in 1948. Indigenous women were not given the right to vote in Canada until 1960. That is pardon me, that's fucking deplorable. That makes me so angry. That's only 10 years before I was born. And today, all women over 18 in Canada are allowed to vote. I went years without voting because of my religious beliefs, because
Mhm.
I believed that Christians were not to have anything to do with the world or politics in the world. But I took it further than that. I wasn't even sure that as a woman, that I could vote, that it would be right for me to vote, that I had the same degree of intelligence
Wow.
as a man. Like it was so pounded uh, into my head. And thinking like that takes some work to overcome. Like it doesn't just happen overnight. And I wanted to show our friends out there. I got this really great magazine a few years back. It's from 2018. And whenever I see magazines like that, I buy them because I need to remind and build myself up, that I'm allowed to contribute. I'm allowed to have a voice and occupy this space, regardless of how many men there may be and how loud they may be. I'm still allowed to be here, and I'm still allowed to say my experience and my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's to me, that's just mind blowing that you thought that women are not on par with men intellectually speaking. I just like it's just that's something it takes a lot to shock me, and I'm a little bit speechless right now. Like just the indoctrination and the kind of brainwashing that is required for people to believe that is just nuts to me. And
Mhm.
I mean, I was so privileged to grow up without any of that. And that's part of the reason why I do all of this stuff, is because I've come to the realization in the last 7 years that I had an extraordinarily privileged upbringing, and not everybody is that lucky. And I'm really sorry that you had to experience that. And I'm glad that you've realized that thinking was wrong, and that you do have a voice, and that we're all really happy that you're using it.
Thank you. A big part of finding that voice for me was finding Twitter and
Mhm.
carving out some spaces for myself on Twitter and giving myself permission to say what I think and what I feel. Um, and it's delightful when that's received, in a way that makes me feel good. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's also really helpful when it's not received in the way I intended it. And then it can spark introspection and looking at, well, am I thinking, is my thinking off in some way, or am I misunderstanding this other person? So it's really good for developing my communication skills.
Yeah, learning to defend your positions too. I find it helpful on Twitter to learn to defend my positions, cuz like I never really had to, right? It was just this was the way life was for me. I never really had to defend my position that I that I'm equal to a man. I've never had to defend that before Twitter.
Mhm.
um but I wanted to ask you, how has your, like, cuz you have two girls, right? How has your parenting changed since you left religion? How have you treated them
Right.
differently?
Well, to start off with, I was definitely like a helicopter mom, just hovering, hovering, hovering all the time. And I homeschooled them specifically with the aim of not allowing secular people or the devil to have access to them, in the things that they would teach them or things that they would be exposed to. So parenting from an extremely controlling mindset. Um, and I see now that that also put a terrible amount of pressure on my kids to be perfect, to be just right. Um, and that was something that was really hard on them. And then as I broke free from my own corset of Christianity, and I started allowing myself things that I had previously been forbidden. Um, I started also, taking my hands off the reins or whatever and letting them experience some things as well. So when I asked my girls about it later, about what it was like to have a front row seat to the gong show when I deconverted, they just said that I became much easier. It became much easier as a mom and just as a person when I wasn't confined and constrained by religion anymore. So yeah, things got I think a lot slacker in our house, and it was just a very different feeling.
A
Mm.
Danish debater asked, "How did you break free from such a state? It sounds like it's extremely self enforcing, especially for women and even more for mothers."
Wow, what a great question. Yeah, for me, I had never really questioned it or had any real doubts about it. And then we went through a span of about 2 years when my husband was a pastor, my ex husband, he was a pastor at the time in a small town in Canada. And during the period of 2 years, we had several this major calamities that befell our family, like from our family of origin, and then also our immediate family. And it was just one thing after another, and things that I couldn't explain away as the way that I used to, saying, well, God is chastening that person or chastising or correcting that person, or God is trying to draw that person back into the fold by some terrible tragedy. Um, and I was finding it harder and harder to make excuses for God about why these things were happening. And then the last straw for me was when our youngest daughter was afflicted with a life threatening disease. And I knew for sure that she was innocent and had never done anything that deserved um, to get so sick. And that's when I really had to stand back and acknowledge the fact that maybe I had bet on the wrong horse, that maybe Christianity didn't have all the answers and wasn't the right way to go. So then I started giving myself permission to explore, and I looked into other religions, and I really jumped into the whole New Age thing. Grew my dreadlocks, had my crystals and my chakras and my all this kind of stuff. When I go in, I go all the way. Um, and so then I did that for a few years, and then I started to see that wasn't really too different from any other religion. It becomes like an ideology that people cling to, and to the exclusion of other ideas being allowed to percolate. And so finally, I got to the point where I realized I don't actually believe any of it. And then I was able to call myself agnostic, but it was still a couple years after that before I could be comfortable saying that I was an atheist, because there was still some fear attached there. The fear of hell was real, and the fear of my children going to hell because I had misled them was something that I also had to deal with. Now I see that there is no such thing as hell other than what we make for ourselves, or sometimes what people are living here on earth is so difficult and disastrous and challenging. So that's how I got from there to here.
So obviously you were raised in a very Christian family, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um what would you tell parents of girls is the most important thing to do that you learned um by experiencing the wrong way when you were growing up, like what would you say is the most important thing with girls so that they don't end up indoctrinated and
Right.
following
Yeah.
religions like this?
Hmm. That is such a good question. I would say uh, supporting your daughters and absolutely letting them know that you believe in them, you believe in their ability to learn and grow and make good choices, and trying to raise children to be resilient. And so that even when they do make a bad choice or something happens and they kind of get knocked down, you know that they can get back up again and that they will have you to lean on. It's about loosening the control. And I understand wanting to have some degree of control over our kids, especially because there are a lot of real dangers today, and a lot of dangers that weren't even around when I was a kid. So, it's a balancing act for parents, and we want to make sure we're being mindful, but really encouraging your daughters. If you can get your daughters, if they're interested in sports, or of course, encouraging them in STEM, the science, technology, mathematics. What's the E in STEM? Engineering,
Yeah.
mathematics, but also the arts as well. Encourage your daughters to do something that they're passionate about. I showed you a magazine a few minutes earlier. Encourage them with stories of other women who have made it. And I actually wrote down a few. I wanted to read them out if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure you've all heard of Jane Goodall, and she's just done incredible uh, things in the science and behaviors around animals. Rachel Carson, famous environmentalist. Eileen Collins, the first woman to command a space shuttle. Fanny Cook, conservationist. Ida B. Wells, journalist of lynchings in the United States and the South. And there were these three sisters, the Maribel sisters, Patria Minerva and Maria Teresa. They were in the Dominican Republic, and they resisted the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo, I think his name was, and they were killed for it. Catherine Goodpasture, an American microbiologist. Maria Guadalupe Evangelina de Lopez was a Latina leader of the suffrage movement in California. And Ursula Burns, first Black woman to run a Fortune 500 company. And that was Xerox. And I can't imagine if my parents had spoken those things into my life, had told me, we believe in you. We think you can do whatever you set your mind to doing, and we want to help you however we can. When we are strong, have a strong sense of our own identity, we're much less likely to get trapped into groups like just different cults. So I think raising your kids um, to have a strong sense of who they are is a great first step in protecting them.
I think so too. I would add that something that women did a lot when I was growing up and girls was basically talking shit about each other, being very
Mm,
judgmental of each other. And I remember that this was not, or this happened with women in my life, aunts and my mom and stuff like that. Like there was always some kind of judgment about what she or what this looked like or who was eating what and stuff like that. There was a lot of judgment. I did not grow up with the religion, but there was still that women versus women mentality, right? Like when you walk into a room, it just feels like there's a conflict between the women in the room. And so I would add that raising a girl, one of the most important parts of raising a girl is to never talk shit about other women in front of them. Don't perpetuate that. If they do that, shut it down. Like I remember there was one time when my daughter went off to this youth group. It was not religious. I made sure of that.
thank you.
She went off to this youth group. When she came to live with us, she was extraordinarily anxious. Like she had crippling anxiety, and
Mm,
for the first little while she would not even get out of her bed. And then she eventually found this youth group, or we found it together, and we encouraged her to go, and she eventually went despite the fact that she was terrified. And and she ended up making a lot of friends there, and this was I credit this youth group with her success and where she is right now. She's just a normal teenager right now. um
nice.
but one thing that happened was that there was an adult at this youth group who, one day our daughter came home and told us that this person had, or this adult in the youth group had commented on the sexuality of somebody else when they weren't there, of a child, of a teenager.
Aw.
And the first thing I said to my daughter is that it's not okay. Like I don't, and she was telling us, kind of laughing, like, oh, she said ha 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 ha, and we're like, no, that's not okay. That's not okay for an adult to be saying that about a child. And Um, I just think it's really important to shut that down when that happens and explain why it's not okay to be judgmental of other women. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what they've been through, what they're feeling. It's so much better to find a reason to support them. And so, when I'm around my daughter and we're talking about other people, I always find nice things to say about them. That's one of the ways that I try to raise a girl who respects other women,
Mm,
and in turn, like when you're constantly cutting down other women in front of your daughter, she's getting the message that women aren't good enough, including herself. And so that's why it's really important to just never say that stuff, and to always build up other women around you so that she understands that she has worth and she has value, because she translates it to her. That's what kids do. Kids always turn everything about them, right? you
yeah.
know the old age old story about like two parents getting divorced, and you have to explain to the kids that it's not their fault, because kids automatically go there. They
Mhm,
automatically hear that you're talking about them even when you're not. So I think it's
mhm.
really important to make sure that you're not cutting down other women.
That is such a beautiful and powerful point. And in my home, when I was growing up, neither of my parents was prone to gossip, but certainly there would be a judgment around whether or not people were Christian, whether or not people were part of our religion. And so it was kind of demanded of me that I be very friendly and kind to everybody, and that if I saw someone hurting, I had to go and help that person. But there were strings attached with a lot of the friendships that I developed, because it was always from a root place of, can I convert this person? Can I
Mm-hmm.
make this person become, or have influence in them becoming a Christian? That was kind of the overarching goal um, behind my actions and motivations. And so now, to be a secular humanist, when I connect with someone, it's a real treat and a real treasure. Just, I happen to like them. I enjoy
Yeah.
spending time with them. It's not with some ulterior uh, motive. And yeah, just teaching our children that they are good enough. And you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good Canadian saying for you. Everybody doesn't have to like you. Not everybody will like you. The person who has to like you is the one that stares back at you from the mirror. So,
Mm-hmm.
teach them about integrity. I love what you said, being careful not to malign other women around them, and certainly asking our kids what they think. What do they think about this? What do they think about that? How would they do things differently if they were in charge? What would they do to try and get things moving in a different direction? I think kids are really flattered when we ask them those things, and they want a chance to tell us, and do it when they're young, so that when they're teenagers, that door can still be open, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. And another good way to lift them up is to give them trust. I find like
Mhm.
there's so many, and I really don't understand it because I live in a really, really small, very safe town. Nothing happens here outside of missing cows. And I think I've mentioned that before. But, but it's true. Like that's the big thing, is that Pete lost his cow. But it's funny because a lot of the parents in our town are like those helicopter parents, you know? There's not a lot of religious people here, despite the fact that every second building is a church. But they're all for like karate lessons and stuff. But some of these parents are very like they hover over their kids, and um they don't give them the freedom that kids should have. And it drives me crazy to watch that, because I know that one of the best things that I've ever done for my kids is give them the trust. And we live in a perfect place to do that. We used to live in Surrey, and that was maybe not the best place. to do that, to just let them roam free. But we
Yes.
definitely let them both roam free now, with the exception of the pandemic. There's rules. They're not allowed
Mhm,
to get in anybody's car, and they have to social distance, wear masks, and all that stuff. But outside of that, they're allowed to roam free. My son has to be home by dark, and he has to let us know where he is, and he has a phone, so I can always get a hold of him. But
mhm,
it's not hard to find him because there's like two streets. So, uh, but I think that especially a girl, giving a girl the trust that it, you trust them to make the right decisions, to be safe, and to not put themselves in any situations that are going to end up bad. Um, that goes so far when you give them that trust. Then they are compelled at that point to be worthy of it. And um I think that's definitely something that's powerful with girls, because girls have historically been, kept inside and sheltered, and
mm.
they're a commodity to be handed off to their husband when they get married and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Oh my
So
God, to be
just
given
send them
away.
out. Yeah, so send them out into the world and just say, I trust you to make your own decisions. You're an adult, because she's an adult now. Do what you're going to do. We trust you. We believe in you.
Well, and one other thing that can also be helpful as we're encouraging our daughters to explore and make their own choices is to make sure they know that if by some chance they do get into a pickle, if they do end up in a situation, any situation where something does not feel right, where they feel like they need to get away immediately, that they know they can call us anytime, day or night. We will stop what we're doing, we'll get out of bed, we'll go get in the car and go get them right away, that we are on their side, and we will be there to help them as best we can. When I think of the
Mhm.
pressure, undue pressure that I put on my poor little girls to be perfect. And I look back on my own life and I see that pressure was also put on me when I say that I was basically commanded to go out and be kind to everyone and help every, stray person, whatever the situation is, because everybody needs Jesus and I have to be Jesus to everyone. That's a massive amount of pressure to put on a child. And there can also be boundary issues that develop from that. If I where's my boundary? Where do I end and the other person begins? If I'm always supposed to be putting my own needs last, and we have to be also thinking in terms of that oxygen mask dropping down in the airplane, and we're told by the steward of the plane or whoever's in charge of the plane to put it over our own face first and then put it on our child.
Mhm.
We have to take care of ourselves. And that's another thing. It's very important that we teach our daughters they must take care of themselves. Do not wait for someone else to take care of you. Do not depend on someone else to take care of you. You can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important to send the message to girls that they are enough on their own. Because I think that growing up as a girl, and this happened in my life too, there was just this unspoken rule that you needed to have a boyfriend, or you needed to find a man, and you failed if you don't find a man by a certain age or whatever. And I remember even in high school, when other friends would have boyfriends and one girl wouldn't, she was not measuring up to everybody else. And I think that that's really toxic. It's just silly. Like, you need to be okay on your own. I think that for the most part, we did okay instilling that in Abby. I hope so. Um,
Mhm.
but I think it's about trusting them, and it's about encouraging them to go in the directions that they want to go in. And like for us, we told her from day one, we don't care about your school as you're showing up and doing your best. We don't care what grades you bring home. We'll never care. And we told her we don't expect you to go to school. We don't expect you to to college or anything like that. We don't expect you to do post-secondary school. If you want to do a trade, that's totally fine. If you want to go into art, we've told her over and over and over again that we will support whatever she wants to do. And I think that goes a long way towards them feeling like they are enough for themselves. I think
Mhm.
when you put a lot of pressure on kids to live up to your expectations, then they always end up feeling like they're never enough.
Mhm.
And so I think that's one way to definitely help girls.
And in Christianity, your purpose as a female is to grow up and get married and start a family. And one way, I mean, the Bible says, "Be fruitful and multiply," as a way to grow the kingdom, and certainly when we look at a lot of other religions, people are having very large families. And in Christianity, also, there's an offshoot called the quiverful movement, which is very devastating for a lot of women. And it's basically where uh, it's insisted that you pop out as many kids as you can. I mean, 16 kids, 17 kids, 18 kids are not unheard of. And this is not only very hard on a woman's body to go through childbirth that many times, it's also very hard on the husband, the father, who has to provide for all of these. It's very hard on children because you're going to be pretty hard pressed to find a room that can house 15 kids, each with their own bedroom. And so the older kids end up having to raise the younger kids essentially. And then I will say also that I know as a therapist, I've come across a lot of instances, unfortunately, where incest is likely to occur in larger families. There's just too many kids for mom and dad to be keeping an eye on everybody all the time. And so to be raised thinking that your only purpose is to procreate, I mean, we don't care if you have a brain or not. We don't care what you might be able to contribute to society. The best contribution you can give is to keep popping out kids.
Mhm.
It's one thing to do it when it's your choice, but when you're told that this is where your worth lies, that's another story entirely.
Mhm. I can't wrap my mind around that. Like I have enough struggle with just like I have the she's gonna be 19 and Joey is gonna be I'm gonna have two teenagers. He's gonna be 13 in August.
Mhm.
And I have enough struggle trying to find enough time to do the things that I want to do with two. And that's not to say that I don't like that I regret it or anything like that. I absolutely love having them in my life and I
Mhm.
wouldn't change anything for the world, but it's still a
Mhm.
struggle. Like it's
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
a struggle to find me time and
Mhm.
to be able to get everything done that I want to get done. Granted, there's a lot I want to get done. I
You and me
I have
both.
a
Yep.
yeah, I have a goal list like a mile long. But yeah, I couldn't imagine 18 kids.
Well,
I
and then
just
it's
couldn't
not
imagine
only
it.
that you have raised all these children, but there are specific rules about how those children are to behave. Like that
Yeah.
the rest of the church will know whether or not you are a successful parent if all your children look like neatly and professionally groomed at all times and they never pick their nose and they never scratch in the middle of a service or whatever. Like there's can be such intense pressure. um yeah, it kind of robs you of the potential joy of parenting and of just being able to enjoy your kids as you have been able to do, and as I also have been able to do. I frankly thought my kids were hilarious. I still think that we they are just very funny women. So yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
My kids are pretty funny too. My kids are smart. My kids are smart. That's one of the biggest things that I've struggled with both of them was school because they're not remotely challenged by anything that's going on in public school. You
Mm-hmm.
should see some of the stuff these kids brought home for schoolwork. I'm just like, is this kindergarten? Like, what's going on? And I remember we struggled with Abby getting her to stay organized and get all her work done and handed in on time. She was just bored out of her mind. But the thing is that like my son is now we're struggling with the same thing with my son. He does not care about schoolwork in any way, shape, or form. And he consistently gets behind, and then the teacher gets in contact with us. And so we work with him to get caught up and stuff like that. And we're teaching him about organizational skills and all of those things. But he is in his spare time, you hand him an iPad in his spare time and he's watching the NASA channel and he explains stuff to me and
I
like
love
he'll
it.
correct me at the dinner table. He'll be like, "No, that's not true, mom." And we'll like argue about it and then he'll pull it up on Wikipedia and be like, "See?" And I'm like, "Where did you learn that?" And he'll be like, "Some YouTube channel." And I always like there was a time when he was I don't know 7 or 8 or 9 or something like that when he used to get up in the morning and turn on Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson on his own. And so he's really really smart, but we struggle with the whole schoolwork thing cuz school is just not compelling for smart at all.
What can we do as mothers to be raising boys uh, and teens and young men who will support the women around them, who will be a safe person to be around, and who will absolutely support them in their rights to have control over their own bodies? And because I didn't raise boys, I imagine it comes with its own challenges.
My son has a friend, one of his best friends is a girl, and they've been best friends since he moved since she moved here. She was the new kid in his school, and it's funny because he was the kid who was picked to show her around and show her the ropes because he's such a caring person. But the way that we talk to him about her, because we've talked to him a few times about like the changes that his body is going to be going through and all of those things. And
Mhm.
one of the things that we've consistently talked to him is about his friend and the changes that she's going to go through and how awkward she's going to feel, and how the absolute best thing that he can do is make sure that you never let anything get in the way of your friendship with her and support her and try to understand that sometimes the changes that kids go through in puberty are especially difficult on girls.
Mhm.
And to try and just understand, like if she seems moody to you or different to you, don't say that to her, just be supportive, and um we've really tried hard to keep them friends because I know that a lot of people they would have intersex friendships between a boy and a girl when they're little, and then when they get older and everything gets awkward, they lose each other, and I don't want
Mhm.
that to happen to them. So we've
Mhm.
talked to him a lot about that and talked to him about not he's had a few friends before who have kind of picked on her or not been super nice to her. And we always promote with him to not put up with that and to stand up for her. And, especially if you were hanging out with her first and those friends come along, just leave with her, take her home. And we also ask him to walk her home if it's getting dark and stuff like that. So,
Very
um,
nice. And certainly, you probably already have broached this topic, but the whole idea of consent as he enters
yeah, yeah.
an age where he'll be interested in dating, um,
Mhm.
and how important consent is. And when I look at some of the developing countries that are very ruled by religion, and I just see the danger that is inherent in being born in those countries as a female.
Mhm.
It's um, it's terrifying. It's horrifying to me. And so, I mean, hopefully the world continues to evolve past religion at some point. I've certainly always looked to parts of Europe for that. Just seeing they don't seem to be as driven and motivated and run by religion as we are even in North America, particularly in the United States. So teaching our daughters that they are every bit as valuable and worthy as their male counterparts, and making sure that our boys are raised knowing that as well. I'd love for that to be talked about right from kindergarten.
Yeah, it's interesting because I did do a lot of traveling in the developing world when I was younger. And when I was 15, I was in Bali, which is in Indonesia. And
Mhm.
Indonesia is very Muslim, and also in Bali in particular is very Hindu. Um, and you can tell that there's a different way of thinking because everywhere I went, I don't know if it's the same way now. This was 1992, so this is a while ago. But everywhere I went, the men wanted to touch my hair because it was
Mm,
blonde,
mhm,
and they would, like, they would reach out and touch it.
mm.
And when I was in the pool, there was a pool bar at the hotel that we were staying at, and I was in the pool, and the bartender used to ask me if I wanted to go back to his apartment and do jiggy jig, and
How
yeah,
old were you, a teenager?
yeah. And so I told my dad. My dad and I love my dad for this. He immediately went to the hotel like management, got the guy fired. But then there was one evening when we were out walking around the town, and there's all these people who are trying to sell things to you
Mhm,
in
mhm,
Bali, like knockoff watches and jewelry, and they want to braid your hair. Like they all want to braid your hair, and they will swarm you. Like it's scary. Sometimes they will swarm you. And I remember we were walking with another family who was from the town that I was born in outside of Vancouver. We were there with them, and we were walking down the street, and I remember this guy comes up to me, and he's got like this tray of jewelry, and I was looking at it, and he put his arm around me and grabbed my boob. And I know,
oh,
and so immediately I just went and told my dad. My dad and the other dad from the family that we were with were like, "Okay, just you guys wait here." And they just dropped him, they leveled him.
mm,
But I remember thinking, like, at the time that, like, that obviously I don't condone violence. I never condone violence, and I think there's definitely a better way to deal with it. But in the moment, my dad was very angry, and but I remember knowing without question that what that man had done was wrong, and that
mhm,
people don't have the right to touch you in any way that you don't want to be touched. And
mhm,
um but yeah, it was definitely different in a lot of those countries that I went to, the developing countries. It was really different in Thailand as well. I
mhm,
remember seeing prostitutes who were, sorry, sex workers who
mhm.
were younger than me
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
at the time, and I was 15. They were younger
Wow.
than me,
Wow.
and that was just gutting. I remember
Mhm.
thinking,
And
what is it like? Why do I have this life and they have that life?
yes, and that is reality for so many thousands and millions
Hmm.
of women around the world. One series that I really enjoyed and encourage all of you to watch if you have the opportunity is called Sex and Love Around the World with Christiana Ampor from CNN. And she, I think there's like 12 episodes or 10 episodes or something, and she visits all these different countries to find out what sex and love are like in those countries. And the one on India was just, it was just incredible. It was just so eye-opening. So I highly recommend that series. And not a bad idea also to watch shows like that with our young people, with our teenagers, encourage them to see you have such a small microcosm. Like, you think that high school is everything and these people at school that don't like you or whatever, that it really matters. But there is such a greater world out there for you to explore. And so, you can help them explore it virtually by sharing different programs with them and books and all those kinds of things. Also, to be helping build their confidence, because I think that's an area where women and girls really struggle in this digital age, in this age of social media, where bodily perfections, seems to be what people have to have, and it's just not reality.
Yeah, I think that when the pandemic is over too, if you can manage it, taking your kids traveling, even to the places that, the Karen next door tells you is too dangerous to go anyway. Well, I remember when a friend of ours, we grew up on the same street, a friend of ours wanted to go to Thailand for a couple of months, and his parents were just like freaking out. They're like, no, it's so dangerous there. People plant drugs in your backpack and you end up in prison. And like, meanwhile, I've been to Thailand several times and it's beautiful. I'd go there before I go to the States.
Hmm.
Um, but it, traveling is what snapped me out of my self-involved teenage brain. Like I swear to you, it was Bangkok. It was being in Bangkok and it was seeing the young sex workers and it was seeing just abject poverty. It just smacked me in the face and normal teenage things just stopped ever getting to me after that. And that's why I have, I think, a really thick skin and why I can handle most of social media, is because I've just seen people truly suffering and I I know that I have it good, basically, is what I'm saying. So I think traveling with your kids is something that you can, it's a gift you give to your kids. It's a true education
Hmm.
outside of this silly thing that we make our kids do every day.
I wonder if it sounds like this would be a good time for you to talk for a minute about your project with IAA, what's going on right now, because we've just been talking about young women potentially being forced around the world into doing sex work as a way to stay alive. And it sounds like with IAA, you're wanting to help provide kids with a secular education so that there are more opportunities for them.
Yeah, one of the biggest initiatives with our organization is secular education, and um, it's the thing that we're working on right now is in Guatemala, and in Guatemala, girls especially end up not finishing school. And school is also very, very, like, they have really short school days in Guatemala, and you end up having the kids just kind of roaming around while their parents are still at work. But it affects kids or women the most. Girls tend to stop going to school sooner than everybody else because they're helping with raise the other siblings, they're helping with housework, they're expected to get married and have kids. And so what we're doing is we're helping Humanistas Guatemala, which is an amazing group. If you have time to go learn about them, you should learn about them. But we're helping them fund an after school program. So it gets these kids off of the streets and keeps them out of trouble. And they're these little kits. They're kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen those subscription boxes called Kiwi crates where the kids can order them and I've ordered them for my son before, and you get like this project that you can build, and it's usually got to do with science of some kind and it teaches them all kinds of stuff. So they're buying these kits for them and they're going to be doing these projects, these STEM projects after school. And a lot of the kids who are engaged in this program are girls. So Yeah, and we're at 59% of our goal. So if you want to contribute, you can go to internationalatheist.org, and it's right there in the header. Just click on that button there and you can go and contribute.
That's so exciting. I love that
Yeah.
you're doing that. I hope everybody will rush over there and contribute to your campaign because it sounds very worthwhile. That brings us to the end of our hour. I don't know. Did you have anything else really insightful or interesting, or?
No, I was just going to say that next month in our organization, we're going to be funding a maize mill in Africa that is teaching vocational skills to women. So that's going to be interesting. Watch for that one.
Yeah, that will be interesting.
Yeah.
Right on. Thanks, everybody.
That was a really good episode.
Yeah, I saw there's been a lot of comments taking place on the side. Thanks to everybody for contributing and just for showing up. So please spread the word, like us, and rate us in the podcast places where you can find us. And remember, the link is below. And everybody take care, and we'll see you again, same time, same place next week. Bye.
Bye.